Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Really glad to be here for mile marker 8, which is preparing for high school. And so we're going to be talking about, just kind of what high school is like, what having high school kids is like, and just, we just want to have a great conversation about how we walk through that together as a church and how we rally around each other as we seek to raise our kids as disciples. I want to begin with James chapter 3. James chapter 3 speaks to two different kinds of wisdom, the wisdom of the world and the wisdom that comes from above. James 3, starting in verse 13, says, "Who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, by the deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy or selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but it's earthly, it's unspiritual, it's demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, it's peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy, good fruit, impartial, and sincere. Peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness." And James is just so practical, right? But sometimes they may not come as explicitly as these two comparisons do, but a lot of the values our world puts in front of us are in fact worldly, and we want our kids to grow in this wisdom that is from above. And so we want to keep that in mind, throughout these conversations and throughout these sessions about how do we help our kids grow in the wisdom that comes from God. And so I would like to introduce our guests, and I'm going to let them tell you a little bit about their families. We'll start with the Cardons and then the Tranthams.
This is close enough.
Yeah.
So, hi, I'm Alan Carden. This is my wife, Leslie. We have got two boys. One is at OU. He's going to turn 20 next year.
Next month.
Next month. Is it next month? Wow. Way older than I thought he was, clearly. And then we have a younger one that's about to graduate from Plano Senior High. He's 18 years old. And we've been at McDermott for 15 years, about.
Awesome.
Hi, this is Mike and Cindy Trantham. We have three children. Ryan, who's 28, and he's in his last year of his family medicine residency in Waco. We have a daughter named Shelby, and she is 26 and a teacher in Allen. And our youngest is Ellery. She's 24 and is just beginning her career as an occupational therapist. We have been at McDermott quite a while. We were part of the original church plant that came here from Waterview. So our kids have grown up, and this is the congregation they probably best remember.
Well, thank you both so much for being with us and for talking about the teenage years. And we just want to start out just super positive because these are great years. But what are some of the aspects about parenting teenagers that you really enjoyed?
She'll have the mic most of the conversation.
I would say that especially when you're transitioning from middle school to high school, that at the very beginning they're still very dependent. They need a lot from you, and at first it's still really easy to get hugs. As they get older, it became sort of a game for us just to torture them with hugs, hug sandwiches. So those are some of my.
And really, one of them is a hugger, and the other one not so much. So.
Although the hugger sort of that wore off too, so now it's time to torture him. But I think just holding on to those moments where they admit that they need you. It's just that's some of my favorite times.
And I'm a little more of a redneck than that. I just love the sports. I loved playing baseball and soccer and coaching and helping out with that kind of thing. Those were some good memories that I have.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we also loved all their activities that they were in. I really enjoyed watching them grow, like emotionally and spiritually, starting to see them start to take that faith on as their own rather than just what mom and dad believe. And that was it. And just watching them develop those deeper friendships, rather than just playing alongside another kid, you started to see real relationships develop, and that's fun and very rewarding.
And I think in their teenagers, their personalities really develop and mature. And we were talking earlier, we each have multiple children, and their personalities are all very different. And those teenagers, they kind of solidified and began to really take a life of their own.
And one thing I appreciate about, both y'all being here and all of you talking about this is sometimes, admittedly, people will say, hey, the teenage years are hard, and they are, and we'll talk about some of that, but how do you kind of maintain that positive outlook as you, seek to parent during the teenage years?
It's not always easy. I think one of the things that, kind of looking back on it, we always assumed that everybody else had it easy and we were the only ones that were struggling. And that's just not the case. Especially when they were younger and they had problems. I don't even remember some of the issues, but we used to get really frustrated and we're like, nobody else can be experiencing this, when in fact, everybody goes through it. We've been really blessed. Our kids haven't fallen off the deep end, so to speak, which is a blessing. I don't know that it's anything that we did, but neither one of them have ever really rebelled in any kind of serious manner. But everybody has the same struggles and challenges, and I would say if you're raising your children and you feel like you're alone and you're the only one that's going through this, and everybody that you see around you has it so much better than you do, that's not the case. And I think too often we stressed ourselves out thinking that way. And when you kind of sit back and go, no, we're not alone. Everybody goes through this. It's part of the maturation process. Everybody's experienced this just like we have. And I think, I forgot your question already, Matt, but, yeah, that's one of the ways you could try to stay positive, right? Because it's in those times when you think you're alone that you get down. But if you realize that everybody else has their same issues and their same problems and you're not alone, there are people that you can talk to that have had the same experiences, it's one way to kind of keep you from getting down.
Yeah. And I would say also expect the best from them. That's one good way, I think, to stay positive with it, because you often get what you expect. Sometimes you get some surprises, but you can work through those. But I think just, expecting the best from them and assuming that they're going to, be trustworthy and responsible. And most of the time that it works out that way. And, they don't become teenagers just suddenly overnight. It's that gradual transition, and the things that you do when they're little are so important, so that you do have, a smoother time during the teenage years too.
And I think when, not if you have those rough patches, just remember this too shall pass. Mm-hmm. And it's a time of learning for both the parents and the young adults. Mm.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. There's an end in sight. It will get better.
Right.
So that's a good way to keep yourself motivated, or what's the term? Positive.
I think sometimes that when they're changing so much through their teenage years, there's so many things that frustrate you, but then there'll just be this, did you see what he just did? I mean, and they'll just make you so proud, like, that's my kid that just stood up for his friend or didn't do whatever someone else was doing or whatever. And those little moments, those keep you like, see, we're not messing this kid up.
Yeah, there was one where Brady, I don't remember what grade he was in. He was pretty young, but there was another child at school that was being bullied, and Brady intervened and stepped in to stop the bully. The way he chose to stop the bully was to spit on him. So we get a call from school saying, your child spit on somebody else. And me, I have to say, I was kind of a little proud, right? I was kind of like, okay, we'll talk about maybe something alternative to spitting, but I couldn't have been prouder that my kid stepped in to help another kid that may have been, in a situation he couldn't handle or was being bullied or whatever it was. So that was one of those moments that I look back on and go, that was really neat. So you go through these times, like she was saying, where it feels like the world is kind of coming down and you're screwing everything up and you're being an awful parent. But there's always these things that happen like that. And you kind of go, okay, maybe this is not so hard. Maybe this is not so bad.
Exactly.
Maybe there is an end in sight. Maybe it's going to get better.
Give you a little boost to keep going.
Yeah, yeah. You just don't want to get stuck in a rut where you're just always worried about what's the next bad thing that's going to happen, because there's going to be really great things that happen like that too. And if you can
Yes.
look forward to those, it makes things a little bit easier.
So one of the things that we wanted to talk a little bit about is, this, it's kind of a buzzword, but it's a true word, and it's the word identity. And, this is a time in which kids are trying to, learn more about themselves and grow towards young adults. I love the fact that you already talked about that phrase, Mike, of, that's what we're working towards, right? But one of the things we do the first week we have our youth interns is we always drive them by Allen High School, and we drive them by the big Plano schools, and most of them are from other parts of the country, and they're just like, these schools are huge, right? They're massive, and it's hard to to find your way in some of these environments. So how do you think about how do we help our kids navigate that kind of search in a healthy way?
I think one thing, you just have to be present and engaged in their lives. Know their friends, know their events that they're participating in, and be there. And I think that's crucial to helping with that.
We said yes a lot to trying new things because they would encounter a kid that's, hey, this group's doing flag football, or so for us it looked like a lot of different sports. And once they committed to something, they had to finish the season. That was our rule, but they didn't have to ever do that again. So, we tried everything. And for them, their other extracurricular thing that they tried was band, which ended up being the thing that they stuck with. But sometimes it was almost like, there's a lot going on right now. We've said yes to a lot of things, but all of those things, they on their own sort of weeded out what was kind of their group of people or the thing that interested them most. So that was kind of fun for us to just let them try things and figure out what interested them and what that looked like.
We did sort of the same thing. Ours went to Allen High School, and as many high schools, like you said, Matt, that is huge, and we just wanted them to find their little group, and their little group was the Allen Band, but just
Their section
something-
within the band, right?
Yes, their section within that band. That they just needed someone, some other kids, things that they had a common purpose, a common goal with, and that seemed to help a lot. That they, were able to find that smaller group, and then their friends within that group to be involved in. So
I think, in large congregations like McDermott, we have small group. And I think your small group is crucial when approaching high school. When Mason was finishing 8th grade, the only extracurricular he had left at that point was band. And he was just kind of done. He didn't really like the instrument he was playing. He was kind of done. And he was like, I think I'm going to quit band. And I had this moment of, whoa, you still have to have a group. You're going to high school. And so we talked about a lot how important it was for him to have a group. I said, I don't care what that group is, but you got to have it. And so he ended up, I said, I encourage you to try band for one semester. You've never done marching band. And then after that, you don't have to stay, but I want you to give it a shot. And his people for the next 4 years have been band people. Because as you said, the high schools are enormous here, and if you can't do something to make that smaller, your kid could end up being that one on the fringe. And the fringe is a very scary place for our kids to be, and so I can't stress that enough. I completely agree. I don't care what that organization is, but they have to have an organization that they are involved in that is their extracurricular group to not get lost in a sea of kids.
We have that exact same rule. We don't care what you're involved in, but you have to be involved in something. And from there, you find your group and your people.
And one thing I love seeing, and I've seen you do this with Brady several times about posting about what your kids love and loving watching them do what they love, right? And I think that's such a powerful witness to all of us, because they may not pick what you like, but it becomes what you like, right? Because you care about your kids for sure.
That was I was going to talk about how it was important to us to know their friends, and that may be a different part of the conversation. But we got involved in everything, so much so that there were times where it just seemed never ending. Like there was always something going on, and it wasn't just the kids; it was us. Like she volunteered with the band, with several different organizations at school. And I was a photographer for a lot of different things at school. But as part of that, we got to know their friends on a very personal level, which to us was really important. We wanted to know who they were talking to, what they were talking about. Because honestly, I know we have a lot of influence on our kids, but once they hit a certain age, I think the parental influence kind of takes a back seat, and they start taking their leads from the other kids in their peer group. So if they get into the wrong peer group, that's what scared us. And what we were pleasantly surprised to find is that the people they chose to be friends with were really good people. You know, they weren't always people that maybe attended a worship service on a Sunday, but they were really good people. They didn't have anything that ever gave me any heartburn. They were considerate. She had all kinds of long conversations. She talks a lot more than I do. My conversations were really short with those kids. She has developed like really intimate relationships with a couple of the kids, and they talked about all kinds of stuff. I mean, it was even to the point where Mason would get tired of the conversation and go upstairs, and the kids would stay down there and talk to her. But that was fine.
Sure.
It was fine to get to know who he's spending his time with. And I would totally encourage any parents of middle school kids that are getting ready to send their kids to high school to try to get involved as much as you can, if for no other reason than just to know who your kids are being influenced by, whether they're at school, whether they're at band, or no matter where they're at. And that was helpful for us.
Before they start driving, agree to drive their friends places.
Yes.
Because they have all kinds of crazy conversations in the car
Yes.
when they're all together, and you can see what level of silly. But I remember, for whatever reason, I decided to downsize my car when they were like 8th grade, and then all of a sudden, 27 kids needed to be somewhere, and I didn't have my minivan anymore, and I was like, man, I can only fit 3 kids. but I think that's a great thing to do. Be
Yes.
the carpool person,
Yes.
because it stinks in there. But
But you learn a lot by being very quiet and listening to what's going on back there.
And even ironically, maybe not ironically, some of the best conversations that were ever had were when you had one-on-one time with a kid in the car. You want to talk about that for a second?
well, my favorite times it's got to be one kid and me, and you have to be in the car for more than like 20 minutes. And I never planned it. I would just realize that we were in another one of these moments, and we would have our deepest conversations. To this day, that still happens when we're alone for a stretch. So I think it became a thing later, like, okay, I'm going to do this with just this one kid, and we're going to spend some time in the car, because I don't know why. Maybe they felt guilty playing on their phone when it was just the 2 of us, because I needed someone to talk to. But they would ask me deep personal questions, sometimes spiritual questions, sometimes embarrassing questions. And I always, from the time that they were 3 and asked me embarrassing questions, I always answered them with the truth that I thought they were mature enough to handle at that moment. So they've always known they could ask me anything. But those things have always happened one-on-one in the car. And so, and once they did get their driver's license, we volunteered together for an organization. And we always made it a point, like we would drive there and then we would go to lunch. So you have your volunteer time like Saturday morning, and then you have a lunch date. It ended up being the 2 of them with me at certain points, but each of them also had the opportunity on either end of the age limits for it to be just like a lunch date with that one son. And those are great times, because when they're at home, for my boys, they reached a certain age and they just never came out of their room again. Like, are you up there? Okay. Because in the car, you're
Sure.
trapped together, but at home,
Sure.
Good luck extracting them.
And we tried kind of the forced conversations. It's a weird way to say it. It's not like we tied them up and made them talk. But when you sat down and intentionally and purposefully tried to have a meaningful conversation, those were never as successful as the real spontaneous things that just kind of happened when you were doing something unrelated to this very structured, organized conversation, like driving in the car for 20 minutes. And those were the conversations that were the most meaningful and the deepest. And I never really seemed to get, although you know, a forced conversation, you can definitely talk about things, but it just never kind of got to that extra deep level where you're really understanding each other at a whole different level than just sitting across a table and talking superficially.
Well, and that really ties into, this idea of, navigating through the noise, right? Our kids are getting messages from so many different places. And, one of the things that, we want to talk about a lot in these sessions is if they're not asking you, assume they're asking this, right? Or assume they're asking somebody else. And so, like you said, it doesn't matter the question, right? Just the engagement is so important. We talked about friends, and that's also super important in this search for identity. Any thoughts about identity before we move on that we want to make sure and stress that how do you help your kids are there any things that you did intentionally to say, hey, I see that you're good at this, you should explore this further, or any thoughts about those kind of things?
I mean, so Brady is our oldest, and Brady, both of our kids are real introverted. They're not extroverted people at all, and they would prefer to be disengaged if they have a choice. And Brady, he has not confessed Christ. He has not been baptized yet. And then he was going to go away to school. And it was scary for us. We're wondering, what's his identity? He hasn't chosen the identity that I hoped he would choose, right? I mean, you hope that he would make that conscious choice to be a follower of Christ and put him on in baptism. And the years went by and it didn't happen. It happened for Mason, but it didn't happen for Brady. And it really worried us and stressed us out. And we kind of thought, this may never happen for Brady. So when he graduated high school and was getting ready to go to OU, it became even more stressful for us because now he's not even going to be with us. We're not going to be able to make sure that he's attending worship. We're not going to be able to have those conversations. He's going to be 3 hours north of here, and it worried us a lot. So we moved him into OU last fall, and we left, came back home, and I think that was on a Saturday. And on a Sunday morning, the next Sunday morning, we have, I don't know, I shouldn't tell all this, but we can track our kids with our phone. I'm sure you guys can too. Yeah, so we're sitting. So we're sitting around waiting for worship to start. This was COVID, in the height of COVID, so we're at home, sitting on the couch waiting for worship to start, and we pull up the little tracking device and just to see where Brady was at. And he was at the worship service at the local congregation.
At church, when most people were going to do it online, they actually had a service, and he went.
But I can't tell you what that meant then. It was like, wow, that's the last thing that I expected. I mean, all these years, I kind of thought, I don't know if it's going to happen for him, and it terrified me. It terrified me that he had not made that choice. And then I thought, once he's out of the house, what are the odds that he's going to make that choice? So that Sunday morning, when we realized he was sitting in a worship service in a town 3 hours away from us on his second day in Norman, Oklahoma, was really cool. And it was really encouraging. And then he got involved with the Sooners for Christ, which is a campus organization for students. And it's kind of like the AFC, although they don't necessarily travel around and do a lot of that stuff. But they have a little house on campus where they can meet and spend time together. And that has become one of his priorities. He doesn't ever miss a meeting of the Sooners for Christ. And in fact, we were trying to figure out when he was going to come home for the summer. So he's going to be coming home next Tuesday. But one of his deciding factors as to when he was going to come home was not when his last final exam was. And it was not when the dorms were going to let them out. It was, I want to make sure if the Sooners for Christ have a year-end party that I'm there for that.
That's great.
I was like, oh my goodness. So I've felt so encouraged, and for so long, I worried and stressed and thought it wouldn't happen. And I guess what I would say to the parents that may be watching this is don't lose hope. Don't lose hope. It may not work out exactly the way you wanted it to work out right now, but there is an end in sight, and God is ultimately in control. And in this particular scenario, our prayers were answered. They haven't been answered yet, right? I mean, he's still maturing. He still hasn't confessed, Christ, but he's moving down that path. He's engaged with people that are on that path and in that lifestyle. And we couldn't be happier with the way it's turned out in OU. It's made our lives a lot less stressful.
And I will say that we always wanted him to have his best friends here in youth group. And we always had him here, and in the summers it was like, you at least have to pick one trip, you're going. Pick one, you're going. And he was always here for class and for all the worship services, but he didn't, it was never his best friends. That didn't work out for us, but luckily his secular friends, he didn't have friends with us at home all the time, so he was really involved in drumline, so I became the drumline mom, and I'm like their best friend. They all know me. If he's not going to talk to me, I'm going to talk to those guys. So I was engaged with them that way, but it didn't work out for us here for him to bond with the youth group. But I think his exposure to the youth group and being involved in those classes and being so familiar with youth activities, even though those people didn't become his best friend, he already knew he liked that environment. Does that make sense? So it didn't work out exactly the way we wanted it to while he was still with us, but all of those experiences here were just I feel like we're just kind of a launching pad for him to get involved in the college youth group.
And one other comment about identity. One thing that I think we maybe neglect to do sometime is drawing on the congregation here. That if your child expresses an interest in maybe a field that you don't have any background in, chances are there are people here that you can talk with and help them learn and navigate through that.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's great. We just want to spend the last couple of last couple of minutes on this session around this idea of maturity, and we started out talking about wisdom, and there's so many different things going on, and one of the things we talked about in our preparing for college class a couple weeks ago is in the latest survey of when they asked kids, when do you become adults, 28 was the age that was given the most.
28.
Kids said that?
Kids said
They
28.
admitted that, okay.
Because the thought was it was either around the time you got married
Okay.
or around the time you had your first child. And, from looking at the different surveys, they came up around 28. Well, that's different in a world that's saying you're an adult at 18 or you're an adult when you graduate college or, so there's just this big, that's a 10-year difference. And so, unless there's some intentionality about working towards certain goals, the definitions may be very different, right? So what are some of these things that you think are really important to say, hey, these are some goals we want to work towards?
I think they've got to learn to problem solve for themselves and not, have mom and dad jump in. Now, you want to be that safe, landing spot for them when they do need the support and the comfort or to bounce ideas off of. But I think it's just so crucial that you're not stepping in and solving every little problem, whether it's a problem with a teacher at school, a problem with a friend, something at church, whatever it is. You've given them lots of tools all this time that they've been growing up, so let them use those and problem solve for themselves.
Yeah. We tried to put them in situations that were uncomfortable for them. And as stupid as this sounds, but our kids were very introverted, like I mentioned. And so it was always like we would come to worship and an adult would approach them and they would never look the adult in the eye. That always drove us crazy. And we could never change that. And so as weird as this sounds, when they were maybe younger than middle school,
I think it was middle school.
like if we were at McDonald's, I wouldn't order for them. I would make them go to the counter and tell the lady their order, as uncomfortable as it made them to actually look at somebody and tell them their order. Things like taking communion to shut-ins. Mason, I fully think Mason hated me on more than one occasion because I was making him give communion to some shut-ins at a local nursing home. And he hated it and it terrified him. But I wanted to put him in a situation that was difficult so that he could see that he could do it. And that helps that maturation process a little bit. We'd go down to that church in North Dallas and participate in their worship service. Neither one of the kids ever wanted to go down there. Whenever we went down there, it was like a fight. You know, they didn't want to go down there at all. And we would go down there and make them serve, you know, the people that are at that congregation. So for me, trying to help them, maybe that was making them grow up too fast. I don't know. That's why I say some of those were kind of stupid examples. But ultimately, if you put yourself in hard, uncomfortable situations, you end up growing as a result of it. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I think those
Yeah.
are great.
And we would also do things like anticipate, you know, maybe problem situations that they might find themselves in. You know, maybe they've gone out with some friends and a friend's chosen to drink and that was their ride home. You know, we ahead of time, before things like that would come up, we'd try to kind of, you know, talk them through it and say, well, what would you do? Yeah, what
Yeah.
would you know, what are some different ways that you can get yourself out of that situation or deal with that?
I think
and that
that's
seemed
great.
to help.
That's great. It's because it's not if that is going to happen to you, it's when it's
when,
going to
yes.
happen to you. So if you've had those conversations ahead of time, then when it happens, they're prepared, or they're at least more prepared than they would have been had it been kind of an ambush, if you will.
Exactly,
You know what I
yeah.
mean? I think that's a great way to think about it.
I think what you guys are expressing, you know, one of the notes on here is from a guy named Tim Elmore, and he says that children are overexposed to information far earlier than they're ready, and children are underexposed to real life experiences far later than they're ready. And I think that's what you guys are hitting at. Even if they feel like they're uncomfortable, you know, that's a huge blessing of, you know, putting them in that situation and making them stretch and grow and, you know, helping them along, right? You know, talking about it beforehand. I think those are super important for sure. Well, I want to thank you guys so much for being with us here for week 1, and I hope that you come back and join us for week 2 as we continue talking about preparing for high school. And we just want you to know that, you know, at McDermott Road, we want to walk through these times together, and you know, what's being shared tonight is everybody walks through it, and we hope that you'll come with us on this journey. So thank you so much for being with us tonight.